So, Thanksgiving is over 2 days ago, right? Thank God. So we can always find something to be grateful for, right? It's great to have that feast, and it's great to spend all those hours in the kitchen cooking. Even if some of our party is out in the other room watching the ball game and they only come in for when the multi-billion-dollar commercials come on, and they come in and they eat that that food that we spent 6 or 8 hours preparing, and it gets eaten in how many minutes? 12. 12 minutes, because that's the length of halftime. But still, we have to be grateful just that we have the family gathered around, right? The title of my talk today is When Leftovers Aren't Enough. The leftover turkey and stuffing and mashed potatoes, that's always enough, right? It's great to revisit them in the days following any of our big meals. What I'm talking about leftovers is the spiritual leftovers, because we don't ever have to settle for them. So we just want to recognize that we don't have to reheat things in our spiritual life, and we don't have to try to replicate the feast spiritually that we have. There's no need to do that, because in every new moment, there's a new harvest and a new feast, and it's ours just for the taking. But if you have family around, which is a great thing to have this time of year, for certain holidays, I think of the story of the old couple whose kids moved out, and they retired. They went to Phoenix. And several years after they'd been there, the old fellow picks up the phone the day before Thanksgiving, and he calls his son, and he says, I just wanted to tell you so you didn't hear it from somewhere else. He says, but we're throwing in the towel. We're getting divorced. After 45 years, we just can't do this anymore. And you guys are gone, so it doesn't matter. And the son says, well, Pop, you can't do that. He says, no, don't even talk to me about it. He says, I can't talk to you about this. He says, I really don't want to do it, but we have to do it because we're just at the end of this relationship. He says, I feel even so bad about it, I can't even tell your sister. You're going to have to tell her. So the son, who lives in New York, calls the sister who lives in Chicago, and he tells her what's going on. And if you have a daughter, you understand how this next step happens, because she says, no, that ain't happening. Okay? This is not going to happen. You get on a flight right now, meet me at O'Hare, and I'll call Dad. So they hang up, and she calls Dad, and she says, I don't want you to say a thing. I don't want you to say a thing. I don't want you to do a thing. I just want you to understand that this is not going to happen. You're my parents. You are not getting divorced. I don't want you to do a thing until we get there, and we'll be there in a few hours. So Dad hangs up the phone, and he turns to his wife, and he says, honey, the kids will be here for Thanksgiving. And they're paying their own way. Huh? So there's lots of gratitude going on right there, right? And we all know just getting together with family brings us that sense of gratitude, doesn't it? I mean, that's what we live for. Although it's true, usually at our family gatherings, we have organ recitals. You guys do too. I know that you do. We have organ recitals. And I'm not talking about the pipe organ kind of thing. I'm talking about when you say to, Aunt Melly, how you doing? She's, oh, terrible. My liver's not working right. I don't know how long these lungs are going to work, and my kidneys, oh my God, that's another story. What's wrong with that picture? We're coming together for Thanksgiving. We're coming together to give thanks and to do it in community with our friends and family and the people that we love. And Jesus said that the abundance of your heart is what comes out forth through your mouth. So if you find yourself in a situation where the complaining and the self-centeredness is what's coming out of your mouth, I think it's time to back up and start ticking off that little mental list of things to be grateful for. And we can always find something to be grateful for. Is that not so? I mean, that's our teaching. And I'm not going to stand here and say we should be grateful for every circumstance in our life. We should be. But sometimes when you're in the center of something that's really, seemingly cataclysmic, it's not going to be very easy to be in gratitude for that happening. But I would suggest that even in that case, we can be grateful in that circumstance. We don't have to be grateful for it, because that's too much to ask, but we can be grateful in it, because we can allow the grace of God to work through us, as we always do, and know, as dark as it may seem at some point, that this is a universe of good, and that this universe conspires for our good, and that everything that happens has a happy ending. And if it's not happy right then, that's okay. Sometimes we have to work through some of the stuff that's going on, but just know that we can be grateful in the situation, knowing that somewhere along the line it's going to come back to us as a benefit to us. So if we practice little bits of gratitude here and there along the way, then practicing gratitude in a tough situation just becomes easier, doesn't it? I mean, everybody practices. Musicians practice. They don't come up here and make that glorious sound the first time out of the chute. I mean, God knows the neighbors have complained for a long time, until they get it to where we have it right now. And that's like us. We can take the small gratitudes, because it is said that if you don't give thanks for the small things, how are you ever going to, one, give thanks for the big things, and two, maybe you're not even going to get the big things to be thankful for. Because gratitude works like that. The more gratitude we give, the more we have, the more thankful we are, the more we pour into the universe, this infinite field of potentiality in which we live and move and have our being, the more we put into that, the more it comes back to us. That's the law of attraction. When we're grateful for things, we get more things to be grateful for. When we're not grateful, not so much. There was a... Oh, I almost forgot. I forgot the announcements first service. But I almost forgot. I wanted to talk a little bit more about leftovers, because everybody eats the leftovers, right? Except us. We didn't eat leftovers this year. We went out for Chinese. It's true. As proof of that, I brought our fortunes. They were so good, they were so apropos, I just had to keep them. Mine said, "Good news will be coming your way. It will be here any day." Well, I just scratched that out and I said, "It's here every day." Okay, so that was half right. Good news is here. And then this one, God knows who to give the fortunes to, right? Because this was Bev's fortune. Your place in the path of life is in the driver's seat. How are you going to argue about that? It's just not going to happen. But there was, back in the 19th century, just barely ahead of what we call realism in writing, just maybe 10, 20 years before that, was the first true pioneer in realism writing. Her name was Rebecca Harding Davis, and she said this about gratitude: "Put it to yourself as you wish. But the fact is, we are all, from birth to death, guests at a table that we did not spread. The sun, the earth, our families and friends, our very breath are parts of the banquet." And she asks, shall we think of the day as a chance to come nearer to our host? On the 4th of July in this country, we celebrate what we call Independence Day. where our ancestors, won the independence for this country from Britain. On the fourth Thursday of November every year, we celebrate really what we should call Dependence Day, right? Because this is the day of all the days. I mean, let's face it, we give thanks every day. In this teaching, we've learned to do that. We give thanks every day. But on Thanksgiving Day, Thanksgiving the noun, the day, we are recognizing our dependence on that power that's greater than we are. That power that provides for us, that consciousness that grounds all being, that makes all things possible, that infinite field of potentiality from which all things come and from which all abundance comes, stays, is always there. Our abundance is never ending. It just plain doesn't stop. So we have Dependence Day. And sometimes we can lose sight of that fact, especially in our Western civilization. Because, let's face it, we're, victims of materialism and consumerism, are we not? Well, who's got more stuff than they need? I promise you, look at our garage sometime. We don't need all this stuff. But we always want what we call financial security. Because when we want security, what other security is it in our culture but financial security? But I would like to suggest that it's not financial security and more things and bigger and better things that we want. What we're looking for is financial and every other type of serenity. Because really, when you put yourself in that place of gratitude that brings to you, and it will, that inner peace that the world in all its stuff cannot take away from you, then you have serenity. And I promise you, when you have that serenity, you got all the security you need. There's nothing that we have that's going with us. There's nothing that we have that's not going to expire, including ourselves. These worlds will pass away. But the fact is that inner serenity, that inner peace, is going to be ours forever. Sometimes we want to challenge that. Sometimes we want to put that in a precarious position. And I'm thinking mainly we want to do that when we start this comparing game. Who's done that? Comparing. I want to compare myself to somebody else. When you're kids, your parents always compared you to someone else, right? You want to be like so-and-so? Or why can't you be like so-and-so? You can't win that game, okay? And you can't win the comparison game either, because I promise you, it doesn't matter what you have, who you are, where you're going, where you've been, whatever it is you have, there's somebody out there that's got more of it. You don't think that's so, think about your financial situation and then think about Bill Gates. Think about your athletic ability and then think about those Olympic athletes that gather every 4 years and wow us to death. And if you think you're pretty smart, which we all do, think about, things like Albert Einstein and, maybe Stephen Hawking, something like that. So we can't win this game of comparing if it's going to be comparing to other people. But it's a human condition to compare. So I wouldn't tell you to let's don't compare, because that's not going to be possible. But if we're going to compare, let's compare the world right now, and ever since we've been in it, with the world 1 year prior to the date of our birth. And mind you, the world as we know it was going on exactly that way, and it's been going on for hundreds of years, and it'll go on for hundreds of years after us. But just stop and think for a minute. The condition of not of the world, but of what was available to us 1 year prior to our birth. So, I was born on the 2nd day of August in a year. Well, I was born on the 2nd day of August in 1945. So, if you're half good at math, you're going to determine I'm 35 years old. The other half comes along, and we'll know the... But I know that on the 2nd day of August 1944, there was not me. 1 year before your birth, there was not you. There was not the expectancy of you. There was not the thought of you. There was nothing centered around you. We probably weren't even glimmers in somebody's eyes. Now, several months later we were, no doubt about it. But 1 year prior, no. And Gretchen was singing Wonderful World. And it is a wonderful world. But a year before you were born, none of that wonder was available to you. None of it was available to me. And now that it is, I'm so grateful for it. For every instance of anything that comes into my life, I've got reason to be grateful. And really, just by virtue of the fact of our birth, that's like winning the lottery. Because prior to that, we had no claim on any of the joy, the love, the relationship, the beauty, the harmony, the happiness of this world. There's a guy, well, it was a guy, he recently passed away, a Scotsman who was like a world-famous philosopher and theologian. His name was Geddes MacGregor. He was born in Scotland and raised there, and he, when he was a teenager, he had to drop out of school and help support the family. As in those days, I mean, he was born in 1909, so those sorts of things happened back then. But he eventually went back to school, and he in fact earned postgraduate degrees from some of the most prestigious universities in Europe and America, and he taught philosophy and theology a career. He made a career of it. He taught it for years at USC. So this is somebody really close, and you know, and his influence spread to thousands of his students, and from there spread to tens of thousands, no doubt. It's that ripple effect that went out and out and out and on and on and on. And he was thankful for every one of his students. And the reason was, he told the story, that when he was 6 years old, he went with his mother to visit her mother, his grandmother, in Scotland. And they were sitting on the porch, Mom and Grandma, and they were talking, and Grandmother says, I'm just so thrilled. I'm just still delighted that you decided to have young Geddes, because he's really a joy. Well, here's one thing we know about kids. This is an aside. If there's a kid around and you're talking about him or her and you think they're out of earshot, don't make that mistake, because they're not. They just hear things. So little Geddes heard this, and he comes bounding up on the porch, and he wants to know, what does that mean? You're happy she decided to have me. So they explained to him that when he was conceived, Mother was 48 years old. Now, this is 1909, okay? 48 years old. I mean, the conventional wisdom today would say the same thing, but it was so much more pronounced back then. This is not a good idea. Here's all the pitfalls, and just a long list of them. And she anguished over this. She met with her priest and with the doctors, and finally, like right at the last minute, she decided, she said, no, you know what, I'm having this baby. And little Geddes was born. Well, he hears this, and he's got to do something with his new information. He goes off by himself, and he just needs to think about this. He hadn't thought previously about the possibility that he doesn't necessarily have to be here. It's not of his own will or making that he's here. It's because his mother decided, in spite of the odds, that he should be born. So, he had a vivid imagination. Imagine that in a 6-year-old boy. And he saw this image of himself in this long line, and he's heading toward this huge portal, and over the arch it just said birth. And when it was his turn, he started to step through, and a hand reached out and snagged him and dragged him off and said, not happening for you, son. You're disqualified. And he said, this was the most horrible thing. The feeling, this thought was just incredibly overpowering. So he shook his head, and immediately this image came back to him again, only this time he walked through the line and he stepped through that portal, and of course he was born. And he said from that moment on, that gave him a vision of the luster of life and how wonderful a world it is, that he never took a single thing for granted. He gave thanks for everything and everybody that ever came into his life after that. And I think sometimes we take that for granted. Sometimes we live with this idea of expectancy that we're here, so, we deserve everything, and you might want to stand out in the street and shake your fist at the sky and say, it's not fair, it's not right, it's not fair. Well, it's not fair. But the fact of the matter is, if we just allow that grace of God to show up in us as gratitude, we can find things to be grateful for, and we can find that everything turns out for our benefit. One of our very own practitioners, Sharon Rest, who's not here today because I think she's skiing in Utah, but she did give me permission to read a little blurb of something that she had written for us a couple years ago in her practitioner class. And it's about gratitude. And she says, when I wake up in the morning, there is gratitude. I am grateful when the dog bounces happy greetings, so full of joy. The coffee smells inviting as I head for my prayer chair and sit for a bit to hear the fountains flow, the sweet little birds dipping in for their morning ablutions. I smile. I guess I see God more in it all, in people and things. Gratitude. It's just a closer walk with God. And I think that's right. And it's not just gratitude. You ever had somebody say to you something like, yeah, thanks. Thanks for that. Thanks for this. And you wonder, I heard that, but was there any meaning behind that? Did he mean that? Did she mean that? Especially the kids, right? Thanks, Dad. Thanks, Mom. Really? Let's put a little passion in it. Because what lights up our world, that wonderful world that Gretchen was singing about, what lights it up is the passion that we bring to it, the aliveness we bring to it. And the same with our gratitude. We have to be passionately grateful. And then more and more and more and more and more things to be grateful for come to us. So, it must be time for a spelling lesson. I did this just for Court Curtis. Passion. 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 Pass. Pass. Right? Pass. I. As in the I am. Moi. Yo. I. O-N. On. Pass. I. On. Because when we act with passion and we're grateful with passion and we're so thankful that we're just exploding with it, we are passing on that I am that we are. We are passing on that life force from us to all others. And in that manner, there's no question about whether we're truly grateful or whether we're giving lip service to it. I want you to imagine... No, I don't. I want to tell you a different story. I want to talk about the abundance of the universe. And it's a story about the old farmer who had 2 sons, and from the time they were big enough, like probably Geddes' age, 6 or so, he had them out teaching them how to till the fields, how to work the land, how to do everything he needed to do for a bountiful harvest. And then when he passed on, by that time, they were in their 20s, and they knew how to do this. And they decided not to split up the farm, the inheritance. They were just going to work it together. And that worked very well for them. They just split the profits. Well, as the years went by, the one brother is married, and pretty soon he's got 8 kids. And the other brother's an old bachelor. And one night, at the end of a particularly bountiful harvest year, the bachelor brother sits in his place and he says, he says, it just isn't right. There's only me here. My brother's got 10 mouths to feed. I only have 1 to feed. But I couldn't give him anything because he just won't take it. He's just, he doesn't accept things like that. But I know what I'll do. One night I'm just going to sneak over to his place and I'm going to carry a bunch of this grain over there and put it in his barn so that he just has it and he doesn't have to, thank me for it or anything. Meanwhile, the other brother's thinking, my poor brother, he's so unfortunate. I've got 8 wonderful kids. They'll take care of me in my old age. I've got somebody to look after me as I get older and always provide for me. And he doesn't have anybody. It's just him. One of these days he's going to, he's not going to be able to fend for himself like he does. I'd like to give him some more just so he's got it stockpiled, but I know that he wouldn't accept it. So he says, I know what I'll do. I'll just sneak over there, in the middle of the night and put it in his barn. So you know where this is going. They're both sneaking over to the other brother's place, and they got these wagon loads of grain. And in the full moon, they discover each other, and immediately they know what's going on here. And it's said that at that moment, there wasn't a cloud in the sky. And yet this very gentle rain began to come down. And it said further that this was Mother Nature weeping because they got it. They understood gratitude, and they understood abundance, and they understood sharing. And I just like to think that in situations where we could go either way, Mother Nature's always ready and willing to be weeping for us. How much nicer when Mother Nature's weeping in gratitude for who we are and what we bring to life, rather than weeping that same gentle rain in sadness over the fact that we don't get it. So my charge to you would be to go forth from this place today and just share your thanks, share your gratitude with passion to everybody you know. And in fact, if you'd like, just take a moment and bring to mind somebody, something, some person, some being, some event, some circumstance that you are grateful for right this minute. Bring it into this circle of love. And I know that the circle of love is complete. It comprehends all, it uses all, it loves all. It binds all together with cords of everlasting unity. I can never depart from its presence, nor can I ever venture from its care. The circle of love within me is complete, and I know that this extends to the circle of love within each and within this room, and that everybody, every person, every place, everything that's been pulled into this circle is whole, perfect, and complete within this consciousness that has no outer limit, that has no circumference, that has no boundaries. This field of potentiality that exists in perfection for our use at all times. Knowing that, I'm just grateful for each of us being in this and taking care of and taking with ourselves each other. Knowing this is the case, it's with grateful heart that I just give huge thanks for it on this week of gratitude, this month of gratitude, and I allow this gratitude to extend throughout the year. I release this word into the law, knowing that it is already so. And together we say, and so it is. Thank you.